but without a heart, you cannot fit.
What's up, everybody? This is George C.O.C. Samuels, and you are tuning in to episode 81 of the It Will Come Show. And today we're going to be talking about how to build a community using Dunbar's number. So let's dive straight into it. All right, so Dunbar's number. If you have not heard of this term before, it actually relates to the, as you can read here, the typical number of people that an individual can keep track of and consider part of their ongoing social network. All right, and so I'm actually going to use this to refer to the differences between communities and networks. Right, in large networks, typically you will have more numbers and loosely coupled relationships, whereas in communities, based on I guess my experience with them over the years, is that they will be usually tighter, smaller, and have more tight-knit relationships. Right. So as you can see here, in the sort of 150, you have 5 of your closest friends. 15 becomes sort of your super family, right? So your super family may include, first cousins, uncles, aunties, etc. It doesn't necessarily have to be by blood, right? These could be individuals that you have a close affinity with, right? These are relationships that you keep active. So even though they're called a super family here, it could be a family of friends as well. 50, you have your clan, and then 150, you have your tribe. Now, there's been a lot of talks over the last, I'd say, decade, 2 decades about, your tribe. And so actually I'm going to bring up Tribe by, I think it was Seth Godin. Yeah, here we go. So there was a book created by Seth Godin. If you don't know who Seth Godin is, he's a well-known marketer. And he published this back in, let's see, 2009, right? And there was a rise in this because there was more discussions around, sort of lessons from tribes, lessons around communities, etc. Now, of course, the word tribes can have different connotations in different cultures. In this instant, I think Seth was referring to just people's sense of belonging and sense of community, right? Because as social networks got larger and more relationships were involved, people found it harder to feel a sense of belonging or community. And so in tribes, he discusses a lot about this, and it has everything to do with sort of the depth of relationships and also the number. And I've seen this sort of play out time and time again when building communities, that at the beginning, right, every sort of movement and every sort of seed for a community starts out with a few people. Starts out with the individual, then you get a few other supporters, right? Your 5 close friends. Then it goes into the 15 range, 50, 150, and you can actually see sort of the dynamics play out even in a startup. If you're watching this and you've built a startup or been part of a growing startup, you'll notice that up to about 20 gets actually quite difficult because the number of relationships and your ability to communicate effectively just exponentially gets more complicated as the number of nodes or connections increase as well, right? So when you get to around 15, 20, sometimes a lot of businesses will actually stay in that range, right? And it's not until they break out of the 20 plus, you get to 20 to 50, you start to see sort of the next level of problems or challenges that come with that. And then 50 to 150, people are starting to get a sense like they're not knowing everybody anymore, right? They don't know everybody's names. They don't know, who's who. They kind of miss the old days when it was just about 5 to 20. And, this plays out time and time again. And when you start to lose sort of those close, tight-knit relationships, what will naturally happen is people will just break apart into smaller groups, right? So if you take a look again at the diagram, once you get to 150, people might want to go back to their smaller superfamilies, right? Because families provide a lot of lessons actually for startups, projects, teams, etc. And you can have dysfunctional ones, but also functional. And so when you get to larger groups, they will naturally break down. We found in our group community called the Pack, which is a productivity accelerator and accountability group. The ideal number is around 8 to 12, where you can get enough intimacy between members at around 8 to 12. And we actually took sort of lessons from wolf packs actually and observing them. And so here, go up to 50 clan, 150 tribe, right? So now I want to share a contrarian view from somebody else. So you can see here the name of this article is Maintaining Relationships, the Fallacy of Dunbar's Number. And I'm actually going to go through and share why I think this guy is wrong too, because I think he kind of missed the point of Dunbar's number. But I'll loop it into its relation to communities. And just FYI, I've always wanted to do this, so I'm just going to hit it. Yeah, I realize I found that I have a sound effects library, so I just wanted to do that. Okay, so with Dunbar's number, so Robin Dunbar, so didn't explain where Dunbar actually came from. So it came from Robin Dunbar, who is an anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist, or was. And yes, he became largely known for this number of 150. The actual number from his studies was actually 148, but 150 is easier to remember, right, for most people. And the theory of Dunbar's number posits that 150 is the number of individuals with whom any one person can maintain stable relationships. Now, to add to this, the way that I sort of look at it as is, if I was to ask you right now, right, if I asked you to, in the comments, to put down 50 of the closest people to you, right, like 50 of their names, would you be able to? Most people actually struggle to get beyond 10 to 12 in real life when I practice this, right? And because we're talking about like actual relationships that, people you will check in with quite frequently, right? We're not just talking about acquaintances, but we're talking about people that you maintain a relationship with, right? So if you take that definition and then you look at 150 people, most people won't be able to name or list out 150 people that they actually have meaningful relationships with, right? So Dunbar's number at 150 is the maximum number, right? So whoever is able to do that, like, kudos, hats off to you. So, the genesis of Dunbar's theory was by the name of Bill Gore. You probably have heard of his product. Okay, Gore-Tex, blah, 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 and his factories. Yes, yes, yes. So yes, here we go. Dunbar focused his research largely on the success of Gore, but he also found similar results in other communities such as Native American tribes, military units, and Amish communities. And so this is a really interesting thing to take note of, because when it comes to communities, I've kind of done a similar thing in terms of studied university groups, academia, education, institutions, religious organizations, right? Because a lot of these sort of institutions do community quite well, right? And so if you look at the Native American tribes, indigenous communities, I've spoken about this in past episodes about how a lot of these indigenous communities actually have a lot to share with us in terms of what to do right, in terms of remembering what makes us human. And there's one thing that people who quote, ignore buckets. Okay, cool. So he talks about buckets, and he talks about how, the average Facebook user has 338 friends, and networks can get over 500. This is true. I've actually got thousands of different followers across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. But it doesn't really mean much, because if I was to name out all the people that I actually have or keep quality relationships with across all of that, it may be a handful, right, of people who also will engage with me. So I just kind of put them as part of the network, right, and part of the network. Let's just put it at that, right? So they can be followers and fans. Network-focused professional add around 250 new contacts every year, right? So these networks shouldn't be sustainable, they shouldn't add value, but if they're handled correctly, they most certainly do. And again, I would agree with this. So if you are a business professional, right, you can really use things like CRMs or spreadsheets to actually ensure that you are maintaining relationships with key people. And now I'm actually going to show ways that you can do that, right? And then that actually can help build a sense of community, but noting also that if it's not coming from a genuine place, right, it's just business professional contacts, right? Again, so while you're doing this, relationships is all about depth when it comes to communities, as opposed to just acquaintances. So let's go back in. So yeah, that brings me back to this book. Now, I read this book almost a decade back now, and I actually found it very, very useful. So the book is called How to Be a Power Connector, the 5 plus 50 plus 100 rule. You can see there it's a little bit off from the Dunbar 150, but essentially it's the same principle. Whether the author knew this or not, I found it to be like on point. and useful when you're looking at sort of developing relationships in your community or building it up, to be able to identify and separate these sort of groups, right? Who are going to be the 5 closest people in the community, right? Who are sort of the next 15, who are the 50, and then who are the 150 total that will make up that community. And so I'll use tribe and community here for the 150 number, because I think if you do move beyond the 150 number, it becomes less, or it feels less of a community. Now remember, there are exceptions to the rules, because there are a lot of groups online that call themselves a community, and they're usually referring to a group of people who share anything of similar interest, right? So, even businesses will use sort of like the Apple community. What they're talking about is actually an online platform, usually a support community, where people come to ask and answer questions, right? So they will call that a community. But for myself and what I use as a principle in terms of helping other businesses and brands build a solid community that will have deep relationships, I will use this number. Right. So yeah, this book, highly recommended. If you haven't checked it out, I suggest you do. If you are somebody that's very people-based and you're looking to get a lot more nuance with your relationship building skills, especially when it comes to building a community. You can use different tools, right? You can use a normal spreadsheet, or if you are familiar with Notion. So Notion is similar to this other application called Evernote. It acts almost like a second brain, but I'm going to include this here for you guys. Oops, I'm not going to do that. So yeah, if you want to go check it out, just go to notion.so. The reason why I closed that is because it opened up my personal Notion. So, but yeah, with that, check out Notion. It's essentially like having your own digital journal, but it's very powerful on the inside because they have something called relational databases. All right, and relational databases, let's bring them up here. All right, so how to create your first relational database. Relational databases are a way to connect up the databases you use inside of your Notion. So you can add tables, calendars, galleries, lists, and board view for managing projects and activities. Essentially what they mean by this is you can have multiple sort of tables and databases that interconnect with each other, right? To give more context. So a lot of the times you will have like a spreadsheet, and you got your sort of formulas and everything, and it might not be connected to other databases that you have sort of lurking around, all right? And so Notion does it in a very simple way that doesn't make it seem too nerdy or too complicated or complex, right? So this is something that becomes very, very useful when you're wanting to tie in knowledge about potentially your people and what they are interested in or like. A lot of your well-known social media platforms or networks actually use relational databases in the background for their AI, if you want to call it that, and automation purposes, to be able to give you what they think we want, right? So yeah, you can use a CRM stands for a contact relationship manager or customer relationship manager. The C has been interchanged depending on who you're talking to, and you can use this as a way to just track sort of who's in your tribe, right? Say that 150, who are the main relationships, and use that as a way to sort of ensure that you check in with the most important ones, right? You're actually prioritizing some of the relationships. So when you're building out a community, you can use this as a base to actually keep track of all sort of the key main people, right, that are in the community that you want to keep a relationship with, so you have a solid foundation for when the network grows out even more, all right? And yeah, so I thought I'd share that with you guys today and give you a little insight into what I usually do when I'm building out a community and how I think about it at the beginning. Use the Dunbar number as a way to sort of gauge where your collective is at, right? If you see things growing, and even if you're in a WhatsApp group, right, you'll notice that when you get between 50 to 150 people in a single WhatsApp group, it gets unmanageable. People can't keep up, cognitive overload, and they just will want to sort of break out naturally and have their own subgroups. This is why, like in yesterday, we had the video around why you should build a Slack community. Slack becomes a lot better for scaling purposes because you can create different channels for each of these sub-communities, right? That you could have potentially up to 150 people in those, right? And it creates its own subculture, its own sort of vibe and what have you. but it becomes useful for being able to get a oversight over everything as well, right? If you do manage a large network. Take a look at Reddit. Reddit has, everybody can create their own account and create their own sub-communities in it, but it's a massive network. I wouldn't call Reddit a community, and I wouldn't call Facebook like a community either, personally, because nobody would be able to manage relationships with millions of people, right? Like meaningfully. So yeah, with that, I also thought I'd share with you really interesting news from Twitter. But yesterday it was pretty crazy. But what was going around was articles about the Pentagon releasing and confirming that UFOs do exist. And I think what was even more interesting was that it was, oh my God, that video. It was that it was actually shared last year, and actually it's been shared on YouTube and many other sites for years, decades, right? But I think this is the first time where it's kind of just being confirmed, validated by government sources, right? So what's even more fascinating is that this, oh my God, these videos are hilarious. This type of information, this news, typically, right, in the past, say we took away COVID-19, this would have been like, oh my God, this is crazy, this is actually very newsworthy. But because of just where we're at as a species right now, right, COVID-19, the economic situation of the world right now has a lot more importance than confirming the existence of aliens or UFOs. So I thought I'd share that with you. Whether you believe in them or not, it's your choice. But I think there is going to be more and more information coming out about them if you haven't already been paying attention. And my reaction to this was like, about time. So yeah, with that, hope you enjoyed today's session. Hope you learned something new. With the Dunbar number, as you're building out your community as well, remember to to be patient with it, to build those relationships solidly, because over time, your ROI on those relationships will just be very exponential. I've seen this happen time and time again, right? Always remember the human, and always remember through patience and persistence, it will come.
The eyes may be able to see, but without a heart.